What next for the London property market and property prices in London in 2025? To explore that topic, I'm joined by John Howard. Hi, John.
How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. London, well, hasn't done much growth in the last 10 years, really.
I mean,
since Brexit, really.
No, I mean, you own a lot of London properties in London, whereas I don't. I've always bought all across the UK, and the reasons I've tend to buy across the UK over my 40-odd year career really is because one, London was very expensive when I started, and I regret not buying in London, to be honest with you, although I don't regret the last 10 years probably. But also, as I'm in different areas of the country, you know, some areas have gone up, some areas haven't. I've got a bit more cover, if you like. But then the big gains that were in London prior to 2010.
Yeah. Well, I think there were big, massive gains in London up until Brexit. It was really the Brexit thing. Yeah. Since then, there has been relatively little growth in most London areas. I see some challenges like in the prime. I mean, when we talk about London, London's a bit of a sort of donut, if you like. There's the central London zone, and then there's the outer London zone. So when you're talking about prime, central London, you know, the Westminsters, the Fitzrovias, the Chelseas, the Belgravias, and all of that, that's massively hit by the non-doms, non-doms leaving, and the attraction of wealthy foreign folks living and having homes in London.
If I get offered a flat or something needs refurbishment in any of those areas, I never know what it's worth.
It's very difficult.
Is it worth 3 million, 5 million, 2 million, a million? You know, oh, it's worth 2.5 million refurbished. Well, is it? You know, I don't have the confidence to buy in those areas. That's my problem.
A lot of that is down to, like with everything, just knowing the market at a micro level and understanding comparables in that type of block or in similar types of block in a very, very limited micro area. Because in London you have this thing where just the end of a street can make a couple of £100,000 difference for a similar square footage of space, which is rather strange. But I think we've often had blips up and down with the central zone. What I think is going to be affected quite a lot is the outer zone, the zones 2, 3, 4 areas of London, because I think there have been a lot of, it's a typical part of the world where accidental landlords lived in a place, and then they get married, and then they have family in suburbia,
move out,
and then they keep their flat for rental.
That was always good. That was always good news. There are
Those
areas,
are all being sold.
Yeah, that's interesting. There are areas in London which have come up in the last 10 years. Walthamstow perhaps would be one, where you know because there's a wave of sorts coming out of London. You know, Walthamstow now, you know, there's nothing really worth less than £500,000 in there, I wouldn't have thought. So, but it has got a limit, that. And then other areas that were worth £500,000 10 years ago are still worth £500,000. So, you know, certain gentrification, is that the right word?
Yeah.
They've come up a bit. So there are some successes in London. And of course, Elizabeth Line potentially round there. That was probably priced in 5 years ago, wasn't it? I suppose.
I think that benefited the outer regions that could get in.
Okay.
You know, the sort of Readings and further out. Further out. That really benefited those sort of locations, east and west, rather than the central locations, which are already well connected. But I think what is going to be the thing for 2025 is very little, if any, growth in property prices in London.
Why do you say that?
It's supply demand. It's a classic. The central London is going to be affected by the lack of the international buyer.
The big stuff in
and the outer London is the accidental landlords, or the one or two property landlords selling up. I think the other thing that's affecting landlords with 1 or 2 properties is how long they've owned it for. So people that if you've owned a property for 20 years and you haven't remortgaged, the chances are you've got hundreds of thousands of pounds of equity tied up in one property. And when you look at the rental return, because the yields in outer London are 3.5%.
I'm going to say average is
so the return on the cash you have invested in the property is low for the hassle.
Yeah.
And those people are selling up. I think that's a lot of what's driving the availability of stock.
And of course, depending on your age, you know, it may be that you're at a time of life where, you know, you want to sell your assets and turn them into cash to spend, you know, with inheritance tax at, you know, what it is. There's a good argument for saying that, you know, what's the point of having a few $100,000 in the bank? You might as well spend it, because 40% of it's probably going to go, if you've got a nice house and cash. Probably the house will take the amount that you get free, and the cash is going to be 40% of that's going to go. So you might as well spend it.
So I think there's a lot of people selling.
Yes.
The people buying are going to be owner occupiers, mainly UK-based owner occupiers. But I don't think any of those buyers are going to be investors like they were in the old days. No. Because it doesn't make sense to buy a 2-bedroom flat to rent out and with the stamp duty.
3% return or something.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Well, the return is low and you won't get a decent loan on it.
No.
But you'd have to put in 25% deposit, but you won't get loan to values. You'd probably have to put in 30-40% deposit.
If not more.
Higher stamp duty, because there's not much available for less than £400,000-500,000, plus 5% additional stamp duty surcharge. So it doesn't make sense. So there's going to be there's not going to be no investors buying those properties.
I think that's right. And the other thing, of course, some of these landlords that have owned for a long time may well be selling in order to give some money to their children to go and buy a property themselves. So there's a lot of that going on as well. So it's quite interesting. I mean, you can give, if you're a couple, you can give $750,000 away basically, and if you live 7 years, that's inheritance free. So you can see why certain families are doing that.
And it's a good incentive for the kids to prop you up for 7 years.
Well, your kids are they love you. They love you to bits. Your girls, don't they, Ranjan? They love you to bits. I wonder why. I wonder why. I hate to be cynical and burst your balloon, Ranjan.
So, what do you think the outlook is in London over the next 5 years? I mean, forget about 2025. I mean, do you think they'll even keep pace with inflation?
Well, I think it's going to be very modest. From what I mean, I'm not a great. I bought stuff in London, I've sold stuff in London, but I'm not a great London investor. And you are, so you've got much more.
Can I tell you what I think? I want to run by a theory by you, because you've been investing in property a long time. Now, in the 1960s, and I remember my parents used to say to me, because they came to the UK in the 1960s, they used to view Victorian properties as slums.
Yes.
You know, they were cold, frost on the inside of the windows, outside loos. Why would you ever want to live there? Yes. We want a brand new property constructed in 1972.
Yes.
And that's the sort of properties my parents bought. They were horrified when I was starting to invest in property and buy Victorians, because somewhere in the late 1980s, Victorian properties became trendy. The character, you know, all the covered up fireplaces revealed them and all of that.
Absolutely.
Now, what I'm saying here is that with energy price, with utility costs, and also the EPC regime that's coming, I wonder whether it's going to be back to the 60s and 70s where Victorian properties are seen as old, and it's better to have a newly built property with concrete floors properly insulated and all of that, rather than, and whereas Victorian stock had a premium to newer stock in the 90s and early 2000s, I wonder whether that's going to flip back to what it was in the 60s and 70s.
Well, I think, and this isn't London, so I'm going off the picture.
I think that's a general point for across the UK.
I mean, my country house is some dates back to 1200s. Part of it does. It's damp. EPCs, forget it. Heating's a fortune. Everything else. If you said to me, John, I found you a lovely plot in 10 acres or 20 acres where you can have all the horses and everything else, I would buy it and build myself a brand new house. Now, the difficulty with that in London is that there isn't very little new stock in London ever, because it's already been built on. Outside in the country, what you are finding, and I've got friends who've bought in the country, you know, bought a nice farmhouse in the country. That's what everyone did in the 1990s, by the way. Now they all want to get back into town, and they want coffee culture, they want a brand new house. And it's very difficult. And those houses, those country type houses, they had a bit of a resurgence after COVID, but actually they are cheaper Definitely cheaper than a modern version of the same thing. Without
Yes.
question, they're cheaper. You know, you've got all these houses on estates near me in Suffolk, which is not necessarily a very expensive area. £800,000-900,000 for a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house with a neighbour right next door.
You see
Now
a lot
that's,
of
that's a lot of money for our area.
you see a lot of suburbia areas where you've got 4 or 5 bedroom detached
Yeah.
houses, and people are knocking them down and rebuilding.
Yes.
But it's very difficult to do with a mid-terraced property.
Well, you can't do it.
You can't do
You
it.
can't do it. Even with a semi, it's virtually impossible.
So are those, I think the question I have, I'm speculating on, is are we going to see those be less attractive in the market? And is there going to be a price differential open up between those old stock
Yes.
and new stock, like there was in the 60s and 70s?
Well, there certainly is outside London. Now, in London, I don't think there will be because of the lack of new houses. Because everyone's been built. New flats, yes, but they're 10 for 2 for a penny. I mean, there's loads of new high-rise flats. My God, they're everywhere, aren't they? But I think a lot of people, and the other thing to remember in London is that a lot of aspirational young people buy a flat, they get married, they have children. They're not going to have a flat for children. They're then going to buy one of these Victorian houses with a bit of garden, and then they do well. They then perhaps buy outside London and commute. That's what seems to happen for the sort of middle class buyers.
So let's know what you think about future of London house prices. I think London has always been a different market for the rest of the UK.
Totally different. Totally different.
And
yeah.
I'm not convinced values are going to
No.
keep pace with inflation over the next 2 or 3
No,
years.
I think there's areas of the country that will do better than London.
Yes. Now, on that bombshell, we'll sign off for today. Let us know what you think. Also comment, like and subscribe for more of these videos. If there are topics that you'd like to see John and I discuss in future videos, let us know in the comments below. See you guys next time.